The well that had gone dry. On spiritual aridity. In a small town in a green valley, a well had given water for 400 years. It had been dug by a man whose name no one remembered. The records of the town began, in fact, with the digging of the well. Nothing was recorded from before. The man, by tradition, had been a traveler of some kind, who had come to the valley with a small stick and a measuring rope, and who had stood in the center of what was then a meadow and had pointed at a particular spot and said, in a language the locals had only half understood here, he had spent the summer digging. He had hit water at a depth of 40 feet. He had built up the rim with the stones he had brought out of the shaft. He had left the next spring, and the town had grown up around the well, and the well had given water for 400 years. The well was wide. The well was deep. The well was cool. The water in it had been in the memory of every villager who had drunk it, of an exceptional quality, clear, slightly mineral, with a hint of something the older villagers called the taste of the original. The villagers drank from it every day of their lives. They washed in it. They watered their crops, by buckets carried up by hand, with its water. They had built their lives around it. One summer, with no warning, the well went dry. There had been no drought. There had been, in fact, an unusually wet spring. The other wells in the region, the smaller, newer wells that some of the outlying farms had dug, continued to give water. Only the great well in the center of the town, the 400-year-old well, the well around which the town had grown, was dry. The villagers were furious. They lowered buckets and brought up dust. They lowered themselves on ropes and could not find the bottom. The shaft, when investigated, descended further than anyone had remembered. It went, the climbers reported, perhaps twice as deep as the original 40 feet, though no one could be sure as the bottom had not been visible by torchlight. There was no water. There was only dry, cool stone and the smell of a place that had once held water but did not, in this summer, hold any. They kicked the stones of the rim. They cursed the well in the language of their grandfathers, the old curses, the kind reserved for cattle that had died unexpectedly, for fields that had refused to bear, for events that had no obvious explanation and that demanded one. The mayor consulted the records. The mayor consulted the priest. The priest consulted his books. The books said nothing about the 400-year-old well, except that it had been blessed at its first opening by a bishop of the region, whose blessing was understood to be permanent. The villagers held a meeting. The meeting was, by the standards of the town, unusually contentious. There were several proposals. One was to dig the well deeper, to follow the water down to wherever it had retreated. One was to abandon the well and dig new ones throughout the town. One was to send a delegation to the next town, 20 miles away, to ask whether they had had similar troubles. The meeting did not resolve any of the proposals. The villagers went home in various states of frustration. An old woman, who had been a child when the well had still been new, she was very old indeed, perhaps 110, the eldest person in the valley, came out from her cottage the next morning. She had not been at the meeting. She rarely left her cottage now. She was carried, when she needed to travel, by her great-grandsons. This morning she walked herself slowly, the short distance from her cottage to the central square. She brought a small stool. She set it down by the rim of the well. She sat on it. She did not lower a bucket. She did not curse. She did not look in. She waited. The villagers in passing asked her what she was doing. Waiting, she said. For what? For the well. The well is dry. The well is not dry. The villagers did not at first understand. They argued with her. They explained patiently that buckets had been lowered, that climbers had descended, that there was no water at the bottom. She listened. She did not argue back. She said only, the well is not dry, the well is gathering. The villagers gave up and went away. She waited for 3 months. She brought her stool out each morning, sat by the well and waited. She returned to her cottage each evening, carried by her great-grandsons. She did not, during the 3 months, do anything else. She did not garden. She did not visit. She did not even particularly speak. She sat. The villagers, in those 3 months, did the practical things. They dug 7 new wells. The new wells were shallow. They had been dug in haste by men who were not the Original well's digger, who did not know where to point his stick. The new wells gave water, but the water was bitter. It had a flat taste. It did not have the taste of the original. The villagers used it because they had to. They did not enjoy it. In the third month, on a still afternoon, the well spoke from the dry dark below. The old woman had been sitting on her stool for perhaps 2 hours. The village was quiet. It was the hour of the afternoon nap. The well's voice came up out of the shaft, soft, slightly hollow, with the cadence of a thing speaking from a great depth. "I am not finished," it said. The old woman nodded. She had not in the 3 months expected an answer, she had simply been waiting, but she was not surprised. "I have not died," said the well. "I know. I am gathering. The water you have been drinking for 400 years is not endless. It comes from somewhere. It is being made somewhere. The making takes time. You drank too quickly for too long. You needed me to be a tap. I am not a tap. I am a body. Bodies sleep. I am sleeping. I will wake when I have gathered. Wait." "How long?" the well considered. 2 generations, it said. "Perhaps 3. I cannot in my own body predict exactly. The water is being made. The making is not under my control. I am in some sense like a woman who has been pregnant for 400 years and has only now sat down to rest. The resting is required. The water is in some sense gestating. I cannot rush it. You cannot rush it. The town must wait. The town must in the meantime drink from the shallow wells. The shallow water is bitter. The bitterness is the cost of the impatience. The bitterness will in time teach you. When I wake you will drink slowly. You will not drink from me as you drank for 400 years. You will drink less and value it more. The water, when it returns, will be sweeter than any water this town has ever known." The old woman nodded again. She told the villagers, that evening, what the well had said. The villagers did not believe her. They argued that the well diggers from the next town had said the same thing, that the well was simply dry, that it would not return, that they should fill it in and use the new wells. The villagers had paid the well diggers to give this advice. They had also secretly hoped that the old woman was wrong, because if she was right, they would have to drink the bitter water for 2 or 3 generations, and they did not in their hearts wish to. They did not fill in the well, there was no immediate need to, and a kind of superstition prevented them, but they did not sit by it. They did not, in any other way, attend to it. The old woman went on sitting by the original well. She did this until she died in the 4th month of her waiting, of her great age. She had been 110 when she had begun the waiting. She died at her cottage in the night in her sleep. She was buried by her great-grandsons in the cemetery. They put on her stone the inscription she had requested in her last weeks. She waited. Her granddaughter, who was 68, inherited the stool. The granddaughter took up the position. She brought the stool out each morning and sat by the well. She continued the waiting. She had not, in her own life, been a particularly patient woman, but she had loved her grandmother, and she had understood, in some way, that the waiting was the inheritance. She waited for 30 years. She died at 98. The well, when she died, was still dry. The next generation did not, on the whole, inherit the stool. The granddaughter's children had moved away from the village. The great-grandchildren had become merchants in the capital. The wisdom had not, in the easy way, been passed down. The stool sat by the well, empty for some decades. But the granddaughter of the granddaughter, the old woman's great-great-granddaughter, came back to the village in her own old age, in her 70s, to die in the family cottage. She found the stool. She had heard, vaguely, the family stories. She sat on the stool one morning in her last year. The well, in her year of sitting, woke. The water came back slowly in the spring of her 78th year. It rose over a month from the dry depths. The villagers, when they finally lowered a bucket, brought up water. The water was sweeter than any water the village had ever known. It had the taste of the original, but stronger, as if the 400 years had been only the first iteration, and the second iteration was deeper, more concentrated, more like itself. The village had to be taught all over again how to drink it slowly. Many of them did not learn. They drank in the first weeks in the old quick way, and the well slowed in response. They learned. They drank more slowly. The well steadied. The water became, in time, the daily water of the village, as it had been 400 years before. The great-great-granddaughter died in the autumn of her 79th year. She was buried beside her great-great-grandmother. Her stone said, she also waited. The well is, in some province, still giving water. It is by now 2,000 years old. It has gone dry in those 2,000 years 3 more times. Each time a member of the family has, by inheritance or by coincidence, been ready to sit on the stool. The villagers have, in each generation, drunk the bitter water from the shallow wells. They have in each generation complained. They have in each generation learned. The well has in each generation woken at its own pace. The stool is in some province still by the well. There is at present no one sitting on it. The well is at present giving water, but the family remembers. When the time comes, someone will be ready. The dry well is not the death of the well, it is the well gathering. You wanted a tap, you were given. A body, bodies sleep. The work is to bring a stool and wait. 2 generations is not long, by the body's measure. The water, when it returns, is sweeter than it was before. The bitterness of the shallow wells is the cost of the impatience, the bitterness in time teaches.